All right, so now it seems that we are also live on Facebook, and I see people are already joining the call. And if you need interpretation from English into Bulgarian, please make sure to use the interpretation feature on the lower right below your screen. You can also choose to mute your original audio, sorry, and in this way you'll be able to only hear the interpretation. All right, it's a growing number of attendees. It's 12:03 here in New York, and it's time to start. So hello from me. I'm Milena Deleva, the Executive Director of Elizabeth Kostova Foundation. Welcome to the virtual stage of our annual Capital Literature program. This year's edition is called Writers and Influences, and you are attending the very first event from series of 8 events, which invite contemporary writers to present their literary influences or literary friendships. It's a great pleasure to introduce our first guest, the acclaimed novelist, short story writer, essayist, critic, and poet, Colm Toibin. He is the Irene and Sidney B. Silverman Professor of Humanities at Columbia University. His work has been shortlisted for the Booker 3 times, won the Los Angeles Times Book Award, Costa Novel Award, and the Impact Award. He's the regular contributor to the London Review of Books and New York Review of Books. Colm Toibin is also the author of 9 novels, including The Master, Brooklyn, The Testament of Mary, Nora Webster, House of Names, and the upcoming novel, The Magician, about the life of the German author Thomas Mann, who is the subject of today's presentation. So in a way, this event is also a preview of Colm Toibin's next novel, out in September by Scribner Books. Hopefully, and fortunately for us, this is the first event on the book at all. So following the talk on Thomas Mann and a brief reading from The Magician, another versatile author, Georgi Tenev, will be in conversation with Colm Toibin. Georgi is joining us from Sofia, where he's actively immersed in the literary scene as a novelist, playwright, and a poet. His fiction has been published in English, Spanish, German, Polish, Farsi, and his award-winning novel, Party Headquarters, was published in the US by Open Letter Books. His recent novel, Balkan Ritual, was shortlisted for some of the most prestigious Bulgarian awards, Helicon Best Fiction and Elias Canetti. His third poetry collection is upcoming later this year by Small Station Press. I've been signaled by the interpreters to speak slower. I'm sorry, I'll try. All right, and before I turn it over to Colm Toibin, some practicalities. If you are watching this live stream, the live stream of the event, and if you need translation into Bulgarian, please make sure to join the Zoom call, because only the original audio will be streamed, and registration only takes a couple of seconds. I'm actually afraid that what I've just said makes sense only if said in Bulgarian. I'll be back. I'm sorry, Colm. Ако гледате събитието във Facebook и имате нужда от превод, моля да се присъедините към вебинара. Регистрацията отнема само няколко секунди. This webinar is also your only chance for you to get a 30% discount code for the 3 Bulgarian books published by Colm Toibin, published in Bulgaria by ICU. We will post the code in the Zoom chat, and we are really grateful for this generous offer, but we wouldn't like to bust the publisher who has made the work of Colm Toibin accessible in Bulgarian. So once again, to take advantage of the perks, interpretation in Bulgaria, and the discount, you need to join the Zoom. Following the moderated conversation, if there is time left, we would love to hear from you. Please use the Q&A to ask your questions, and we'll also try to monitor the Facebook feed. I hope you enjoy the event, and I hope to see you next week when another Irish author, Colin McCann, will present John Berger, and we'll read from Ulysses on the occasion of Bloomsday. Anticipated thanks to our interpreters today, Bistro and Martin. And thank you so much, Colm, for sharing your time and talent with us. The floor is yours.
Oh, you want me to start? I'm ready to start. I'm going to read as slowly as I can a section from the very opening of this novel, The Magician, which is a novel about Thomas Mann. And it's his childhood. And his mother has come, his mother was born in Brazil, which is really interesting that she came to Lübeck, you know, this northern German commercial city, and married into a Hanseatic sort of trading family. But she brought something very exotic with her. And so, so anyway, this is this working? Am I? Okay, yeah. So I'm going to start. In the evenings, if the senator were at a meeting or in the time when Thomas and Heinrich, having done their violin practice and eaten their supper, were in their night clothes, their mother would tell them about the country of her birth, Brazil, a place so vast, she said, that no one knew how many people were there, and what they were like, or what languages they spoke. A country many, many times the size of Germany, where there was no winter, and never any frost or real cold, and where one river, the Amazon, was more than 10 times longer than the Rhine, and 10 times as wide flowing into it, that reached back deep into the forest, with trees higher than trees anywhere else in the world, with people whom no one had ever seen or would see, since they knew the forests as no one else could, and they could hide if an intruder or an outsider came. Tell us about the stars, Heinrich would say. Our house in Paraty was on the water, Julia would reply. It was almost part of the water, like a boat. And when night came and we could see the stars, they were bright and low in the sky. Here in the north, the stars are high and distant. In Brazil, they are visible like the sun during the day. They're small suns themselves, glittering and close to us, especially those of us who live near water. My mother said you could sometimes read a book in the upstairs rooms at night because the light of the stars against the water was so clear. And you could not sleep unless you fastened the shutters to keep the brightness out. When I was a girl, the same age as you, the shock on my first night in Lübeck was that I could not see the stars. They were covered over by clouds. Tell us about the ship. You must go to sleep. Tell us the story of all the sugar. Tommy, you know the story of the sugar. Just a small part again. Well, all the marzipan that is made in Lübeck uses sugar that comes from Brazil. Just as Lübeck is famous for marzipan, Brazil is famous for sugar. So when the good people of Lübeck and their children eat their marzipan on Christmas Eve, little do they know that they're eating a part of Brazil. They're eating sugar that came across the sea just for them. Why don't we make our own sugar? You must ask your father that. Years later, Thomas wondered if his father's decision to marry Julia de Silva Bruns, whose mother was reputed to have had in her veins blood from South American Indians, rather than in banking families, was not the beginning of the decline of the Manns, evidence that a hunger for the richly strange had entered the spirit of the family, which up to then had an appetite only for what was upright and certain to yield a steady return. In Lübeck, Julia was remembered as a small girl arriving with her sister and her 3 brothers after their mother had died. They were taken care of by an uncle, and they did not, when they appeared first in the city, have a word of German. They were watched suspiciously by figures such as old Frau Uberbeck, known for her staunch adherence to the practice of the Reformed Church. Will I stop here? Is that okay?
I think it's okay, but it's up to the moderator if he wants it to read more.
Okay. You're in, should I stop here?
If if you're okay with the translators, because if they're ready with the translation, maybe we can go a bit further.
This is not live translation, so this has been translated in advance.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead a little bit more.
Okay, thank you.
In Lübeck, Julia was remembered as a small girl arriving with her sister. Oh, sorry. I saw, and this is Frau Overbeck, known for her staunch adherence to the practices of the Reformed Church. I saw those children blessing themselves one day as they passed the Marienkirche. She said, it may be necessary to trade with Brazil, but I know no precedent for a Lübeck burger marrying a Brazilian. No. Julia, only 17 at the time of her marriage, gave birth to 5 children, who carried themselves with all the dignity required of the children of the senator, but with an added pride and self-consciousness, and some seen before, and which Frau Overbeck and her circle hoped would not become fashionable. Due to this decision to marry unusually, the senator, 11 years older than his wife, was viewed with a certain awe, as though he had invested in Italian paintings or rare majolica, acquired to satisfy a taste that up to then the senator and his antecedents had kept in check. Before leaving for church on Sunday, the Mann children had to be carefully examined by their father, while their mother delayed them by remaining upstairs in her dressing room, trying on hats or changing her shoes. Heinrich and Thomas had to show a good example by maintaining an expression of gravity, while Lula and Carla tried to stand still. By the time Victor was born, Julia was less attentive to the strictures that her husband laid down. She liked the girls to have colorful bows and stockings. She did not object to the boys having longer hair and greater latitude in their comportment. Julia dressed elegantly for church, often wearing only one and shoes, and the only sign of relief, a red or yellow band on her hat. Her husband was known for the precision of the cuts made by his tailor in Hamburg and for his impeccable appearance. The senator changed his shirt every day, sometimes twice a day, and had an extensive wardrobe. His moustache was trimmed in the French manner. In his fastidiousness, he represented the family firm in all its solidity, a century of civic excellence. But in the luxury of his wardrobe, he offered his own view that being a man in Lübeck meant more than money or trade. It suggested not only sobriety, but a considerable sense of style. To his horror, on the short journey between the man's house on Beckergrüße and the Marienkirche, Julie often greeted people, gleefully and freely calling out their names, something that had never been done before on a Sunday in the history of Lübeck, further convincing Frau Overbeck and her spinster daughter that Frau Mann was at heart, at least. And that is the mark of a Catholic, Frau Overbeck said, and that band on her hat is pure frivolity. In the Marienkirche itself, as the wider family assembled, it was noted how pale Julia was, and how oddly alluring her pallor was against her heavy chestnut hair and her mysterious eyes, which rested on the preacher in an expression of half-veiled mockery, a mockery that was alien to the seriousness with which her husband's family and their friends treated religious observance. Thomas realized that his father disliked hearing about his wife's childhood in Brazil, especially if the girls were present. His father, however, loved when Thomas asked him to talk about old Lübeck and explain how the family firm had grown from modest beginnings in Rostock. His father appeared to derive satisfaction when Thomas, calling at his office on the way home from school, sat and listened about ships and warehouses and banking partners and insurance schemes, and then later remembered what he had been told. Henrik was dreamy and rebellious like his mother, was to be found reading books. Young Thomas, alert and grave in his demeanor, was the one who would take the family firm into the next century. As the girls grew older, all the children would gather in their mother's dressing room if their father had left for his club or for some meeting, and Julie would resume her stories about Brazil, telling of the whiteness of the clothes that people wore there, the amount of washing that was done so that everyone looked special and beautiful, the men as well as the women, the black people as well as the white. It was not like Lübeck, she said. No one saw any need to be solemn. There was no Frau Overbecks pursing their lips, no families like the Escutians in perpetual mourning. In Paraty, if you saw 3 people, then one was talking and the other 2 were laughing. and they were all in white. Were they laughing at a joke? Heinrich asked. Just laughing. That is what they did. But laughing at what? Darling, I don't know, but that is what they did. Sometimes at night, I can hear that laughter still. It comes in on the wind. Can we go to Brazil? Lula asked. I don't think your father wants you to go to Brazil, Julia said. But when we're older, Heinrich asked. We can never tell what will happen when we're older, she said. Perhaps we'll be able to go anywhere. Anywhere. I would like to stay in Lübeck, Thomas said. Your father will be happy to hear that, Julia replied. Thomas lived in a world of his dreams more than his brother Heinrich did, or his mother, or his sisters. Even his discussions with his father about warehouses were further examples of a fantasy world that often included himself as a Greek god, or as a figure in a story from a nursery rhyme, or the woman in the oil painting that his father had placed on the stairwell, the expression on her face ardent, anxious, expectant. He was not sure sometimes that he was not in reality older than Heinrich and stronger, or that he did not go out each day with his father as an equal to the office, or that he was not Matilda, his mother's maid in charge of the dressing room, who took care that his mother's shoes were kept in pairs, and that her bottles of perfume were never empty, and that her secret things remained in the correct drawers away from his prying eyes. When he heard them say that he was the one who would shine in the world of business, when he impressed visitors by knowing about consignments due to arrive and the names of ships and faraway ports, he almost shuddered at the thought that if these people knew who he really was, they would take a different view of him.
Thank you very much indeed. Really, I'm full of questions, but maybe before starting with questions, we have some or small expose to tell us, or to start by asking.
I think that scene there comes from life, that I was actually in Brazil, and I was at that house outside a town called Paraty, and it's right in a harbour. And I was with the Australian novelist Richard Flanagan, and he told me that in the southern hemisphere, the stars are lower in the sky. Now, I don't know if this is true or not, and I don't care, but that that at night, if you live like that on water, the stars against the water at night, you can read by that light. It's not like northern stars that are higher and they don't hit water in the same way. But he said, if you came out here at night, this would be all bright because of the stars. And that's really how I knew I could start the book, because I had an image, I had something to work with. I had, I had a clear moment where as her having an image for it, having her something to add. So yeah, that's how the book started.
Huh. To me, this whole first chapter could be summarized with one word: longing. And maybe we'll come back to this word, but let me draw maybe some technical parallels between Lübeck, where all started in Lübeck, and another city, namely the city of your birth, the Enniscorthy. It's pronounced Enniscorthy. I'm not sure the Gaelic pronunciation, but both are cities on a river, close to the place when the river mouths into the sea, into the ocean. And somehow I feel this similarity. Am I just doing nonsense? Longing for the south, because these are not very far in terms of latitude, these 2 points in Germany and Ireland.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that that I almost had a 19th century childhood. We had no telephone, for example. I mean, we had electricity, but there was no telephone. We had a television quite late, so that really it was surrounded with family. This small town where my father was a teacher and he was involved in politics, and that anyone who saw me walking through the town would know me. He's the son. And therefore, yes, the town is on a river, but it's close to the coast. And so when I went to Dublin to go to university, it was almost like describing Thomas Mann going to Munich from Lübeck. And then when I went to Barcelona, which I did when I was 20, it was almost like describing. And all the time, yes, you're talking about ideas of loss and ideas of gain, but the gain doesn't matter because the loss is the sort of dominant feeling, that feeling that somehow or other, as time passed, the natural presence of the next generation in the town dissolved. Whereas my parents, their parents, grandparents were all in the town, lived in the town, are buried in the same graveyard. The next generation simply wanted to go other places. And it was the same too in the Mann. So yes, I'm exploring all that idea of the breakup of something very solid and the movement from north to south.
And entering this topic, this theme, book about Thomas Mann, we're entering very complex universe, because you also, in your book, you created very main, or there is a pillar, Thomas Mann, but as complicated as the family is, both artistically and as a kind of life, different, very versatile companion of thinkers. So your book and your characters, and it's very, very complicated reality. But to me, all the time, as I was reading, this question arises. I was constantly guessing when and where and how the facts finish, and then the fiction starts, and then again the facts, and I was cross-checking, and at the end I gave up in my tries to catch you. Let's say.
Yes, I think that there will be three sorts of readers for this book. The first one, as you say, actually happened. If I go to biography, will I find this moment? What's invented here? And the second group will be in the middle somewhere, where they will just simply read the book. But the third group will be a group who know nothing about the story at all and will simply read the novel. So the novel is written specifically for anyone who knows nothing about Thomas Mann and has read none of his books. It's not, in a sense, a scholarly novel in that sense. And it's a novel in which there is a great deal of information on Thomas Mann, but obviously the scenes I'm describing in the book are intimate. It is as though I'm in the room. And so of course, all that dialogue, which of course I wrote in English, is invented. And of course, some of the actual scenes are invented, but the general shape, the structure of the book is the structure of his life. I have not given him journeys he didn't take, and I have not given him houses he didn't live in. So to the shape of his life, and then I'm being deeply unfaithful by using my imagination to be in the room, almost like a little bird wandering around the house, listening to what everyone's saying.
Specifically for Bulgarian audience, the name of Thomas Mann is something very well known, and at the same time very classical, maybe especially for the youth, of course, but also for a contemporary reader who's not very young. This is sort of a such a gigantic name of a Nobel Prize laureate, sort of kind of dinosaur cultural tag, name, heavy. And your approach is sort of ruining all this heaviness by entering from the beginning the childhood, and then this I must say this and everything else. So was this made by purpose? You're trying to familiarize with?
Oh yes, I was really aware that his public persona was heavy and pompous and self-important, and he drew big crowds, and he often spoke for 2 hours without stopping. in a very old-fashioned German. And so he's associated with heaviness. But of course, if you look carefully, you see that he was never sure. He was never sure about himself. His sexuality, for example, he would be giving a terribly important lecture with a huge audience of serious Germans, but all the time he's looking at a boy in the second row, holding his eyes, holding his gaze. And all he's thinking about is that boy. While everyone else thinks he's thinking about Goethe or Schopenhauer, he's not. He's thinking about that boy and maybe what if he kissed him. And this is all in the diaries. I didn't make this up. This is in his diaries, which were published 25 years after his death, according to his will. So that you then realize that there's a sort of strange longing, the word he used at the beginning, in Buddenbrooks, in his novel, that no one in that novel is certain or confident. Everyone is uneasy. And that unease makes its way, it's a 20th century unease, into Death in Venice. And it culminates in something like The Magic Mountain or in Dr. Faustus. But I'm not as interested in literary creation as I am in the man, as I am in the ambiguities within that character of someone who was one of the most important civilized Germans of his generation, represented decency and goodness in a very dark time. But his own life was so fragmentary, so ambiguous, and so filled with fear sometimes. You know, at one stage, the Nazis had his diaries, and they could have easily destroyed him. And he's the father of 6 children, and the children, of course, are growing up, and they're becoming impossible. I mean, they're part of that generation of 1920s youth in I suppose, Europe generally, but in Germany, whose parents never told them what to do. So you have these self-important, I mean, really, really confident teenagers, Erika Mann, Klaus Mann, who got lots of publicity, who were always, being, one moment she's lesbian, the next moment she's married, and he's gay, and they're wandering around Germany doing a tour of a play he wrote about 4 lovers based on his sister and her lovers. And they're having a wonderful time like young people in Germany did in the 20s. And he's watching them, or sometimes almost jealous of the sort of sexual freedoms that they've won. And of course, they're becoming, I mean, they're silly, the children, and then they become serious. Politics, Hitler makes them serious, and they become immensely serious people. And of course, in 1933, all of them have to go. And this gives my book, I mean, this means that right in the middle of the book, the whole world is shattered, and they have to move, and they eventually move to California.
You're saying that they're funny, silly children, and Hitler made them serious. But there is a quote from the book. Wake up, my boy, Erika said. Hitler is looking at your file as we speak. He sees a nasty, spotty, petulant youth. So
yes, Eric,
I mean,
much younger brother. I mean, he's probably 12 years old at the time. So she's teasing her younger brother. You know that Hitler is like. In other words, there's quite a lot of family talk about power structures within the family, who gets to speak and who doesn't. There's a moment later in the book where one sister wants to cry, and Erika, her older sister, says, "Stop crying." So, who decides who cries? I do. Of looking for power among themselves. Sorry.
No, sorry, I interrupted.
No, you go.
What you described as family talk is sort of a fabric of the book in a way. And maybe we can raise a bit the curtain by introducing the story behind the title, behind Who's the Magician, and how, and please tell me, is this your creation, this small story about the magical?
No, the children called him the Zauberer. The children called him the magician.
But I mean specifically why? Because of this dream.
Oh, one day his son has a bad dream, and his father comes and says, "Look, I'm a magician. I will cut the demon's head off, and now he won't be in your dream anymore." And then he was always doing little tricks for the children, pulling off his thumb and so. And so the children began to call him the magician. And he wrote a novel called The Magic Mountain. So the word, and often in a letter from one of the children, they'll just use Z for the father, meaning Zauberer. meaning the magician. So that's how, oh yeah, no, I didn't make that up. I didn't make things like that up in the book. I mean, that's how, that's what his children called him.
I'm sure that shall this book be translated into German, and this, I think it's something in the very close future. There'll be zero doubt coming from the title that this is a book about Thomas Mann, because in German this will be the Zauberer, and I'm sure that on the shelves of a bookstore, it will directly.
Everyone, you know, in Germany, I mean, this is really foolish of me to do this book, because in Germany, they are a sort of royal family, the Manns. And, you know, not everybody, but most literate people who read books, know everything about these people. In film for TV made about them. And so that this strange Irishman, me, comes into this scene. And the only contribution, I mean, the only thing that I was worried about was that I was not going to try and write sort of heavy German dialogue. So the dialogue in the book is deliberately half, you know, it's half a line, it's quick, it moves like something in Hemingway rather than something in Thomas Mann. And I wanted to make sure that I wasn't trying to write a late 19th century prose in English, which was like a translation from something in German, that the novel would have its own style, and the style would be very, very far away from the style of Thomas Mann, but also from the general style that one associates with dialogue in German. You know, in other words, it has, my dialogue is filled with little words, and it's quick. And so, yeah, mistakes, they'll say, but he didn't do that. I know he didn't do that. And I will say, well, yes, I invented that part.
It's great to challenge also the native speaking audience too. Well, I have a lot of questions really, but we know already about who the magician is and why the title of the book. If somebody asks in the beginning, do we follow the great Thomas Mann at the end of the book and at the end to the end of his life or not? Just to answer this question, is this classical book about starting from youth, from early age, and then going to the end or not? For those who don't know anything about it.
It moves chronologically from childhood, right? And luckily I noticed that there was too much confusion. And I thought, just make it simple. A, B, C, D, move chronologically. So that's how it works. So whenever it moved basically from the 1870s in Germany to the 1950s back in Lübeck.
Before passing to you a couple of questions from our audience, one more maybe awkward question. Have you specific feelings about our story with X-ray? Because this scene in the X-ray unit in Davos, I think is very pivotal and specific in the book.
Oh, it's in the Magic Mountain. He goes up to, he actually didn't, as far as I can work out, actually get X-rayed himself. But in this novel, The Magic Mountain, he describes the process, and he makes the process almost sexual, which of course it is, radiography. I mean, that it actually takes a photograph of the really deep, intimate parts of you. And so it was really impossible.
It's nice that it's nice. Your approach is so kind of artistic and nice that X-ray could be also sexual for other people.
I think him. I mean, he goes in to be X-rayed with this very good-looking Swedish man, and they have to take off their shirt. And they're both, you know, I mean, this is Thomas Mann, like he doesn't play sport. So the idea of taking clothes off for him, so the other man almost touches him and he realizes that they're both going to be exposed, as it were. And so that idea of exposure really, but he puts that into the Magic Mountain and he makes it sexual. He started that, I didn't, but I loved it. It's one of my favorite scenes in the Magic Mountain. And so it's too hard. I mean, it was just too tempting, you know, to do.
Yes, but because I think it's a very point into the plot of your book, because this is the moment he decides somehow the idea about the Magic Mountain comes into light, and he leaves the boss.
Yeah, I think it's always impossible for even for a writer themselves, you must know this, to know exactly what moment did something begin. But there are moments where you can say, it was that moment I realized that I could work with that. You know, and the idea of X-ray, the idea this is 1913, early 1914. And so the idea that this machine could be part of a novel is a wonderful new idea. And of course it animates him, yes, and it gives him inspiration.
I think that you already in some way answered the question by Ms. Nikolova. Can Colm Toibin tells us how he dealt with dialogue on Mann's writing? How did he approach that? And another question now is, did you find writing a novel about Henry James' life helpful for this book about Thomas Mann, or were the projects entirely different?
I think that Henry James had no children, so that therefore, and he wasn't married, so that he was alone a lot more. So that novel is much more about, and also he wasn't involved in two wars. So you have with Mann 2 wars, First World War, Second World War, plus the Munich Revolution, plus the Cold War, plus 6 children, plus a marriage. So it's a much more social book, whereas the James novel is a much more solitary book. And that was the difference between the two characters.
Excuse me for jumping from one topic to a completely different topic, but you mentioned war. And all the time I was thinking about this, the whole Mann family against the backdrop in the first half of the century. But what I would like to hear now is your meditation or reflection or opinion about the state of war today, and how important was this? Also this terminological question, are we in war now, when you are creating your work in the past? Because it's realized.
Yeah, I mean, I think that question implies the idea, which I think is true, that no historical novel is ever fully historical. That no matter what way you're working, even if you're attempting to use the past, the present is there somewhere. So I wrote the book. I wrote most of it in America, and I wrote most of it during the reign of Donald Trump. And what was interesting about Donald Trump, among the many things, was that no one predicted him. That it wasn't as though a year earlier people said Donald Trump is coming. It came as a terrible surprise. I was in America the night of the election, when he was elected the first time, and people were utterly shocked. Now, I was interested in this idea, that is exactly how the Manns felt about Hitler. That it wasn't going to happen. It was too grotesque. This man was a stupid man. Like, why? Like, you know, and he was never going to get all the electoral votes necessary. And his people were thugs. And then suddenly he was running things. And so, and also how gradual it was, and then how sudden, in almost exactly the same way. But there was one funny moment where I'm describing things that are happening under Hitler, or at the beginning of Hitler. I'm just listing things, you know, I'm working, and then I'm reading it over a year later. And I've put in that the post, the mail, the post, and the system of the postman became slower. It was just a tiny detail. I made it up. It's completely invented, that the post became slower. And when I was reading it a year later, this was actually happening in America. In America, under Donald Trump, the post became slower. A letter sent in New York to LA could take 2 weeks under Donald Trump. And I had that in the book as a thing that happened under Hitler. And I wondered, will I leave it in or will I take it out? Because it might look too contemporary. It might look like I'm referring too openly to the present. But I left it in. But I mean, I take your point that the book was written at a time when a dictator had arisen out of the blue, grotesque figure had arisen out of the blue. And people wondered how that happened. And that was what happened with Hitler.
the war comes in very different moments in the life of the main characters, with the exile, the exodus, say. It's important to us today too, because to have the idea of a possible exodus or exile is to have a dreamland or islands or something across the ocean to go to flee to. Are these places sort of shrinking or disappearing, or?
Oh, I think America remains, oddly enough, a place of sanctuary. In other words, that great numbers of people still want to come to America. Under Trump, this was turned on its head, in that for ordinary Americans, they wonder, is there anywhere we could go? I mean, if this place becomes unbearable, where will we go? So, I mean, America, of course, for the in the 1930s, it was where everybody wanted to go, because it was, it's very easy to abuse America, but it has had one thing, that it really hasn't had vicious anti-Semitism, and that most Jewish people have been able to live their lives in peace in America. And that, if you were coming from Eastern Europe, or even coming from France, that was an enormous, enormous gift to people, that they didn't beat Jewish people up. So, Thomas Mann's wife was Jewish, but their friends were Jewish, and America really meant a great deal to them as a place of hope. But of course, as I was writing the book, that was a grotesque, parody then, because Donald Trump was putting children into cages.
You are touching these vulnerable points when one of the daughter is kind of scrutinized by the government in later after the war, of being pro-communist or pro-terrorist, and of these pages are.
This is one of the great surprises of the story for me. In other words, here are these people who are anti-Hitler from a very early point. They're Democrats. They believe in freedom. They are not communists. I mean, it's not as though they're representing Stalin or something in America. I mean, they may be left-wing, but in a very minor way. And but after the war, America becomes a very cold place for anyone who has any progressive views at all. And so the FBI come looking for Erica Mann, Thomas Mann's daughter, who is not a citizen. She's a British citizen because she was married to W.H. Auden to get a passport, but she's not an American citizen. So she can be very easily deported. And then they come looking for Thomas Mann himself to interview him about, that all these great writers in California, they look suspect by 1947. Now, this is again another example of how something, into California becomes grotesque a few years later, as America begins to investigate these very people who they had rescued. And Thomas Mann was part of that, and that was the reason why Thomas Mann, his wife, and his daughter decided to go back to Switzerland in 1952.
And not to Germany,
no.
Curiously enough.
No, if you didn't live through the war in Germany, you couldn't just arrive in when it was over. That people, people suffered so much at the end of that war, that it was their suffering they brought with them into the next year, the year after, not the enormity of Hitler, but the enormity of the bombing of the cities. And the Manns didn't experience any of that. And so I think it left them where certainly it would have been impossible for him to have gone back in and rebuilt his house in Munich and tried to.
But even this is maybe happier development, happier ending than the possible darker scenario you are describing in the book. Because in one instance, Mann is thinking that maybe one day Germans wouldn't be permitted to read his books, and he kind of speculates, if he knew that, maybe these books would look different be paler. And I think it's very, very interesting contemplation of a writer about the destiny, about the future of his own legacy.
Yes, that in the 1930s, as it's becoming clear that his books will be banned in Germany, and therefore their German identity will really not live, that their translation into English might matter, into other languages, but that as he's writing these words, as he's working, the public has turned poisonous. And the words themselves, even, some of the words have been taken, that the very German language is now associated with violence and with extraordinary evil. And so he realizes that extraordinary thing, that these books will be pale things in the future run by Hitler. These German books that he's writing will dissolve, will mean nothing. Now, what that meant for him can only be imagined, that he was going to lose his language.
I think it's very interesting, your approach, the whole book, from the German perspective, but also from a broader European perspective. Because do you know how, personally to me, the legacy of the Mann's family altogether came through this Mephisto film based on Klaus Mann book, which deal with the same problems we are talking about. And you touch this story also with the German prolific actor who worked also in the time of the regime.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth remembering that book, which reads to us so innocently now, this is Klaus Mann, Thomas Mann's son's novel, Mephisto, that the Germans didn't want it in print in Germany after the war. So that as Klaus is going, as Klaus just presumes, once Hitler is gone, my book comes back in. But of course, the book was about the corruption of an actor. It's based on a real actor, and the real actor had been a big Nazi favorite actor. What happens in 1946? This actor is back on the stage. He's being applauded wildly by people. Klaus's book is not allowed to be published. This is post-Hitler's Germany. And of course, this is a very difficult period for especially the Mann children, because they realize they have no place in the country where they were brought up, that they're not wanted there.
Speaking about also these German feelings and also German language, in the beginning I used the word longing that somehow describes at least the first chapter of your novel. The German word for longing is Sehnsucht. And curiously, the Italian conductor, Claudio Abbado, once said that there is no such word, such beautiful word in Italian. In Wien, he gave an interview and he was admiring the beauty of this German word.
Yeah, there's no word in Spanish, real word in Spanish either.
And from this kind of heavier subject, back to the visions of Julia da Silva, the mother, to the childhood. Tell me more about these youth characters of young children, because everything's so vivid. It's almost a theatrical play. As if if you're inviting me into a sort of a stage rehearsal with this short dialogue. It's not a long, without monologues.
Yeah, I was using maybe something like Ingmar Bergman's Fanny and Alexander, just to visualize the sort of gatherings and the way in which grandmothers, aunts, uncles appeared. But I think what's the most important thing is that this was a very rooted family. They really belonged in Lübeck. They owned ships, they owned warehouses. The father was a senator. His father in turn had been a great businessman. And so they had this extraordinary roots. Now I think this mattered enormously to Mann, because it gave him his first novel, Buddenbrooks, that he wrote as a young man. and that I think remains one of the great 19th century novels. And also, strangely, one of the really readable, one of the ones that you could simply bury yourself in, even now. And but it gave him this sense of himself as a German, as someone who came from a Hanseatic business burger family. It gave him a sense of self-importance throughout his life, but more than self-importance, a sort of rootedness. And it came from, as you say, childhood, from being noticed in the street, from the inner life of the house, which they were interested in culture. You know, the whole business of mother playing the piano, the father collecting paintings, the whole elegance, continuity of a sense that they went back generations and there would be more generations to come. And in the novel Buddenbrooks, he cuts this off, that Hanno, who will inherit everything, he dies as a young man. And, you know, the Thomas Mann family were scattered. They went to Munich, where there were nobody. In Lübeck, they were noticed every day. And in Munich, they were nobody. But they brought with them from childhood a sort of self-importance, a sort of sense that they mattered in the world. And of course, the world became an important, you know, that what being a German was became such a big deal as the First World War broke out and as the Hitler rose. And Thomas Mann had some sort of, his position was a strong one because of his rootedness in Lübeck. But yes, I needed to make those images of childhood ideal, something to be remembered, something that you would think of as a golden father, the father, when all of that was complete, something that was shattered later was complete before it was shattered. And I was using that idea of a great, if you're Irish, you really notice it, a great European bourgeois culture, looking up at a window in Stockholm or some city, seeing lamplight, seeing books, a wall of books, seeing, you know, realizing that someone in there is listening to music now. That idea of an old, undisturbed bourgeoisie, that if we don't have that in Ireland, it just isn't like that here. You know, people I know in Barcelona have furniture from a century or 150 years ago. They have a table. Well, no one in Ireland has a table belonging to anyone from anywhere. You know, you're lucky if you have an IKEA table. But, you know, that idea of continuity really fascinated me because I don't come from that. It's not my world.
Let's jump now to more heavy stuff, maybe painful question. You're writing about real persons. They're not alive, but these are humans that existed. And you're entering very intimate fields and scenes. For instance, this one, when on the telephone they are calling with this awful news about the death of Klaus in France. And I was always thinking myself, when I'm working for the stage or for the screen, how do you dare? Or, you know, there is question of author's responsibility of entering somebody's world, even this is in the past, someone. And you entered so many times, so many intimate fields of so many persons in this very large-scale novel.
The first thing is that Thomas Mann himself wrote a novel about Goethe as an old man falling in love with a young woman. So it's not as though he didn't do this himself.
Okay.
So he would have said, you can never do this. And the other thing is that your job, I mean, you're talking about that scene when a telephone call comes to say that his son has committed suicide.
Yeah.
Thomas Mann was in Stockholm when his son died in the south of France. He did not go to the funeral. Himself, his wife, and his daughter stayed in Stockholm while the son was buried in the south of France. His other son, Michael, happened to make the funeral and played something on his viola as the coffin was being lowered. Now, my job is to think, wow, I have to imagine the days around that. My job is to imagine. My responsibility is to get this right, is to create a drama is to have some way of looking at those scenes where they seem true, where some way or other is done, not to explain, because explanation is too easy, but to create an atmosphere whereby the reader can see slowly that they're not going to go to the funeral. And, but also that they're so shocked. And but you have to be careful with words like shock. So you move very, very slowly over 3 or 4 days. Almost every hour of the day is dealt with some conversation, some phone call, something going on. A great deal of it is imagined, but the central thing is they did not go to the funeral. That's what in life. And my job is to take that fact and see if I can make it radiant, luminous, matter, seem true. Actually, so that someone reading something about what it's like to hear the news that your son is dead, for a man and for his wife, for his daughter, what that's like, so that it doesn't really matter to me whether it's connected to the Thomas Mann story, but what I'm working with is attempting to dramatize it, so when the reader reads it, it seems to be not only true, but a version of life that might not have been dramatized before. I mean, I'm not aware in fiction of another story in which a man's son commits suicide and the man decides not to go to the funeral and they stay in this grand hotel for 3 or 4 days. So I had a story I was writing. I was trying to be faithful to the story.
Were there moments where the book kind of transgressed the magician, mesmerized you, your own life, entered your reality, the same way you're entering the reality of the Mann family?
Yes, in the 1940s, Thomas Mann had cancer and he was treated by very good doctors in Chicago, and he has very good accounts of in diaries and of the treatment. And just while in the middle of the book, I had cancer and I had chemotherapy. I realized, don't put this into the book. You know, like in other words, ignore his cancer, because if you start describing his cancer, you will start describing yours. It will be 2 chapters later, breathlessly, you'll come out of, don't do it. Just don't do it. Just don't do it. And so I just don't do it. The other thing always is sex, because we have won as novelists, and in Ireland it was a long struggle, the right to describe any sort of sex we want in any way we want. And nowadays, you just, with a few clicks on a computer, you can see the most astonishing pornography. And as a novelist, what are you going to do about this? And I really enjoyed in this book not having big sex scenes. That the sex scenes, there's one sex scene that's almost, very little happens. And after that, nothing really happens. There's a lot of gazing, there's a lot of desire, but there's no big Thomas Mann sex scene. And I think it was really important for the book that it didn't have that, because I think almostness, the thing that didn't happen, the thing that almost happened, I think might be more dramatic than the thing that's graphically described.
One more question in the very few minutes we have left from Susan Bernovsky. Well, I'm so looking forward to reading your novel when it comes out. I'm wondering whether, and if so, how, whether the process of working on the book changed what you felt about Thomas Mann.
Oh, I think I loved his second last novel, Dr. Faustus, more, and Buddenbrooks. I suppose those big books of his, I really do love those books. He's an intriguing figure because he's not brave, he's not especially intelligent, and he makes mistakes politically. Sometimes he's an idiot, and he's often silent. And what I thought about him is that he was a true artist, in the sense that he was never a fully formed person politically, sexually, or socially. And I think if I wanted to describe a typical, someone, what an artist might secretly be, would be someone who has never been socialized, never been properly sexualized, and is not politically trustworthy. You know, in other words, and sometimes with friends who are so political, so sure of their argument, I can see every side of being certainly uneasy, to say the least, my own homosexuality. But, you know, I don't feel fully engaged with any social world which I happen to be in. If I'm in a room, I'm almost not there in ways. Even if I'm talking or engaged, I'm almost not. There's a part of me that's withheld. And he did this all the time. Everywhere he is, he's engaged in a shadowy way with reality, while those around him are fully involved. So his daughter and his son are fully engaged with the world. They're there in a way that he's not there. He's the second son. He's the gentle boy. He's the homosexual in the family. He's the watchful one, and he's the one that always wants to get away. And of course, I found all that absolutely intriguing. Not admirable in the sense that I wouldn't want him to run a country, but admirable in the sense that out of all that uneasiness, out of all that withholding, he produced his masterpieces. And that's what he did with I think, great determination in that sphere. Certainty, there's a certainty that he had to work every day, that the question of filling pages, writing sentences, remained for him solid one. Other matters didn't remain solid.
Your book made me go back to the shelves of the library and to find this very big, menacing translation, only to find there is no menace. To go back to these books, maybe they're on the backlist of our mind as the huge, heavy classics, and to feel again how vivid and extraordinary Dr. Faustus is. There is a long and brilliant tradition of translating Thomas Mann, and not only him, but also his brother, Heinrich Mann.
All right.
These are translations from the 80s, greatly edited and with great prefaces and notes. And I hope when your book comes also in Bulgarian, it will reopen somehow the interest into the whole Mann family, going back also to Klaus Mann and to Mephisto, and why not to rewatch again the Mephisto film with Klaus Maria Brandauer from the 80s.
Yeah.
I think these are the last minutes in this Zoom chat before leaving this virtual floor and giving it back to our gentle host, Milena Dello. I wish to sincerely thank you, to wish you health, and health.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, because your book, and so I think this will be shared by everyone who read it maybe in September or October.
Yes, coming out in September. Yeah, it's coming out in Germany as well, so we'll be able to see what happens.
I think that the German kind of echoing of this book will be very, very interesting to me. Maybe you are trying to do something that Jonathan Littell was doing with the Kindly Ones in a different field, but I think the resonance will be complicated as well.
Well, thank you very much.
No, thank you. Milena, thank you for having us. Maybe you join us now.
Milena, thank you very much.
Hello, Beck. I'm trying to join you. Thank you so much, both of you. Thank you, Colm. Thank you, Georgi, so much. And I hope The Magician will find its new life soon in Bulgarian. But before that, like you mentioned, in September, it will be published in English, and the link is posted in chat. And also, if you are Bulgarian and you are attending this Zoom webinar, please take advantage of the 30% discount that the wonderful Bulgarian publisher of Colm Toibin's books, ICU, has provided specifically for us. Colm Toibin 30. It's also posted in the chat. And I hope to see you at the next event, which will feature another Irish author, Colm McCann, who will be talking about John Berger. It's more about literary friendship than literary influence. And also the link for the entire lineup of writers and influences is posted in the chat. Until next time.
Okay.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you, Colm.